Welcome to Butterflies of Wisdom. And the reason why I started a couple minutes late is because the conference call line didn't pick up. But now the conference call line is working. And not only do you have me, you have Vaughn. Vaughn is a fabulous keynote speaker. He actually spoke at the Aspen Ideas Fest last year, which the Aspen Ideas Fest is literally right in my backyard. And he is a podcast host. So without further ado, I'm going to let Vaughn take it away.
Hi, good afternoon, and thank you for having me on Butterflies of Wisdom. Thanks for reaching out to me via Twitter and asking me to be a guest on the show. It's an honor to be here. I was also Aspen Ideas Festival Scholar last year. Aspen is an amazing place to be at, honestly. But I'm based in Brooklyn, New York. I have a podcast, as you were mentioning, called Decarcerated, which highlights the journeys of success of people who spend time in jail and prison and the resilience and all that sort of stuff. The podcast is sort of like, I'm somebody who's also had that experience, and it's a platform to amplify these stories, because there are so many folks who have gone through these experiences, and I want folks to be able to have an opportunity I want folks to be exposed to the full biography of people who have had, these tremendous lives, you want to call it like that. I'm thankful to be here on your show.
And I have had the chance of listening to your podcast, and I believe I heard your story on another podcast. You guys, I'm such a podcast junkie that I can't remember which podcast I heard your story on. But Vaughn's podcast is one of those podcasts that will stop you in your tracks. You can't necessarily focus on anything else when you are listening to Vaughn's podcast, because, as he said, he is trying to bring out the stories of these incredible men and women, and because of their incarceration. And I believe you give a statistic. How many people, at the beginning of your podcast, obviously, how many people in the U.S. are incarcerated? And could you please give my fans a brief synopsis of your story and why you were incarcerated, and then why you started the podcast?
Absolutely. So, in the podcast, I always say that there's 70 million people in America living with a criminal conviction, right? And that's a whole range of misdemeanors to felonies. And these are people who are not in prison now. These are people who are amongst living in your neighborhood, your community. They have kids in your schools and all that sort of stuff. And currently incarcerated is, over 2 million people in prisons and jails across the country, not including the amount of people that are held in immigrant detention. We have, as a friend of mine has a book called Incarceration Nations, we have an incarceration nation where we have, we only have 5% of the world's population, but 25% of the world's incarcerated population. And my sort of journey into this space, I went to prison when I was 19. I'm now 37. I went to prison when I was 19. I spent 10 years in prison for my role in a violent robbery attempt. I was a lookout in a violent robbery attempt where 2 people were actually killed. And I speak about this. I recently gave a TED Talk that's out where I speak about that. And, it's the most horrific thing I've been a part of. I think anybody can be a part of. It's drastically shifted so many lives. The people who were harmed, their family members, the people who were in that community, that neighborhood when it happened, the people that saw it on the news, my family, and, so it's, one situation can affect a multitude of people. Whether it's a good decision or a bad decision, in this case a terrible decision, can affect a multitude of people. So during that time inside, I was initially facing a life sentence, and it was eventually reduced to a 12-year sentence, of which I served 85% of that time, and did 10 years, 2 months, 7 days. And during that time, thankfully, I was able to earn a degree, an associate's degree in criminal justice, and begin like my career as a writer and program developer, developing programs for the men who were like preparing for their release. I was able to prepare programs for folks and all that sort of thing. And then when I was released in 2009, 2 days before Christmas, at 30 years old, I got sort of like continued exactly what I was doing in prison. So I started a youth mentorship program called HALA, which stands for How Our Lives Link All Together, right out of jail, and working with some kids in schools who, the staff of these schools identified as needing more support than others, and organizing college trips for them. And this is all without being paid for it. I just volunteer my time doing that sort of stuff. And then eventually started working as what's called a violence interrupter, so intervening and mediating conflicts in the community, which I'm from in Brooklyn, Crown Heights specifically. And then moving on to starting another youth program called Youth Organizing to Save Our Streets, and looking at the intersection between trauma and gun violence. And now, I started this podcast now. So it's been 7.5 years since I've been home. And, understanding my journey, which is still continuing. And there's a complete biography that folks, if you don't know me, if you just read the headline of what I went to jail or prison for, you don't really see the entire biography of me. And I'm not saying that should be prioritized over the biography of the people who are harmed. By no means am I saying that. What I am saying, though, is that folks, folks often ask me, like, well, how did you went to jail and you did this much time and you're able to do this and et cetera. And so I figured, like, let me start this platform because though I'm one person who has been able to recover from that sort of, that time away, there are millions of other people who have also been able to do that. And I think there's a popular narrative. You watch popular television, Netflix or MSNBC on a weekend, you think that jail and prison is just full of people who are just like doing everything bad, continue to do everything bad, evil, and disgusting, and destined to do it when they're released. And I'm saying that sensationalized view of it, although there is some truth in what happens and it's happening, but there's another truth in a different narrative that folks don't hear about. And I think one of the reasons why we don't hear about it enough is because we think it's sort of distant from us. Like those people over there went to jail, or that person in that neighborhood or that street. Well, we see that there's over 70 million people who have a conviction, living with a criminal conviction in this country. Well, it's not so easy to distance ourselves from it, right? 300 million people in this country, over 300 million people in this country total, and even about 70 million have a criminal conviction. And pushing folks to ask a deeper question, why is there so many people in our community, in our neighborhood, in our nation? Why are there so many folks who are making choices, harmful choices to themselves and people in their vicinity? And why is that happening so much? So like the podcast, Decarcerated, there's people who I interview folks from across the country who have had a criminal justice experience to kind of like hear their journeys of success. And the journey of success doesn't mean that we just hear about what they're now doing this job or they have this organization, but really in three parts. What was their life like before they went to prison? Now, when they went there, what was it like in terms of like what was the transformational moment or what happened? Like what happened that allowed them to sort of shift and become doing things, positive things? And then the third part of it is like you're home now. Like what support did you need? Did you get? And why and how are you doing the work you're doing now? And I think like the platform, a couple of things. It gives hope to people who are inside, who are thinking like life is hopeless once I get out of here because of many barriers and obstacles for reentry from prison. But also for the family members of people who have people in these places. There's a level of hopelessness that people, the family members have, thinking like when my partner, my son, my daughter comes home, like it's not going to be here for them. And I need people to be able to see that there's potential and possibilities for them no matter where they're at. And then lastly, beyond just people who have been impacted by the criminal justice system, I think stories of resilience, stories of redemption are stories that we all need. In a world where there's so many things happening, I think to hear personal stories of resilience, redemption, and hardship, and mistakes, and trauma, I think people to hear those stories, it gives anybody, speaking, whether you've been impacted by violence, criminal justice experience, prison, jail, or whatnot, as a human, connecting to the human element of people, I think it empowers, is an empowering factor, and I hope that's what the Decarcerated Podcast does.
Well, you are doing such a fabulous job getting these stories out, and you were so blessed and so lucky that you were able to earn an associate's degree while walking the hallways of prison system that is not very pretty, by the way. I don't know how to put this, but I will it meant to send my podcast, and so many people don't know I was allowed when I was in 10th grade in the Colorado prison system. And man, that was impacting me, and I did not go to prison. I went in there as a guest, as a learning experience. But man, that impacted me like there was no tomorrow. So I can't imagine being you and having to deal with it from the inside. I wasn't put behind bars, but I did see a cannibal, and that scared me after this, that cannibal was actually in there, and this was, I believe that the Colorado system is in Denver, Colorado, is one of the bigger ones in the country, and it impacted me as a guest, so I can't imagine how the orange jumpsuit impacted you. And so what would you say to people inside the prison system who may be listening to this podcast or have a family member who is listening to this podcast right now? How would you give them hope from a prison aspect, and how would you suggest they start a platform like you did?
Thank you for those questions. Because ultimately, I want folks inside to be able to hear the podcast. People often ask me, like, what is, like you asked, like, what is it that got you to prison? And, what I've learned in terms of having insight into my own life is that there was definitely the instant offense that, the day would happen and the details of that day. But that was not what, like, got me to prison. Right? That's not what led me to the place where I would even be in the mindset to, like, be involved with that sort of behavior and that crime, ultimately. So for folks inside, as you're in there, I always ask, I go into prison still as I do this work still and speak to folks, is like, be thinking about what is it that, not so much like what got you to prison, the instant offense, be thinking about like what is happening in your life that would put you in a place you can be thinking along those lines of engaging in whatever act you engaged in. And that comes from the place that, like, no baby is born to go to jail or prison. I mean, like, you don't look at a baby and say, oh, wow, I could see her in about 15, 20 years going. No one does that. You just want to kiss and cuddle and tickle and, and hug them and, throw them in the air and play. But there's some things that happen to that person in their lives that puts them in a place where now they make these terrible decisions and choices. And not absolving people up there what they've done, but, like, pushing folks to be thinking about a deeper insight into why they've done that, right? Because once you understand the deeper reasons why you even, like, in the place, in the mind frame to do the things that you've done, one, you're less likely to repeat it, but secondly, you're now able to sort of heal from whatever those things were. And once you're able to heal, like any physical wound, once you heal, you're able to do, like, if you got a cut on your knee, once that wound when it turns into a scab and the scab goes away, it may be a blemish there still, but it no longer hurts. You know what I mean? And I think that, like, a lot of folks who are in these spaces are hurt for different things, right? And we want to get to the point where they're no longer hurt, because if you're still hurting from something, you're still going to be paying attention to it, and you may still be like, you may not want anybody to come remotely close to that wound. And I think that once it's healed, it doesn't matter to you anymore. But though the blemish is still there, it can sort of now, when somebody else looks at your blemish, you can give them sort of like a story in terms of like how you move forward from it, and how you propel your life from it. And that's how you begin the journey, the next chapter of your life. You know, you have to be able to understand that that blemish still exists, right? The blemish doesn't go away, but you can move forward from it. And that blemish that you had on your leg or your arm or whatever it is, obviously metaphorically, like it no longer bothers you. Like, it sort of like moves you forward. And that's what I want folks inside to be able to always see that, like there's still hope in their own humanity. You know what I mean? I think for folks who experience people who are in jail, whether they visit, they have family members, like see that there's still hope in their humanity as well. I think that's what propels folks forward. That's what propels me forward. Is that like I saw that there was hope in my humanity, and that's important because you know when you hurt people, the guilt can sometimes overwhelm you, and you feel like there's no hope for me. And I think folks need to be able to heal from the hurt that they've caused, right? And the hurt, and also the hurt that they sort of have self-imposed on themselves. And that's what I want people to be able to do, and that's what I want folks to see that they're capable of. Folks are capable of amazing things. Because ultimately, so many of us are hurting, whether it be from physical issues to emotional things. And we can all relate it in different ways. It may not be the exact same thing, but we can relate it in different ways. And once we can relate our hurt, then we can also begin to the process of relating our healing.
You said that so eloquently. Once you get past the pain of going to prison or losing a loved one, we can ultimately heal ourselves. And that's why I didn't want to interrupt you, because you said that so eloquently, Dawn, that it's really unbelievable how you have built yourself and now bringing the inspirational stories of all these other incarcerated men and women out on your podcast.
Thank you. I mean, you know, you have a platform here with Butterflies, and you know, and I think ultimately there's a commonality. I mean, you're providing people with a platform, with an opportunity that's full of insights. And insights may be through somebody else's life, and then they can apply it to their own personal lives. You know, and I think we may be like target, our entry point may be different entry points, but ultimately I think, you know, the commonality is that we want to empower folks, we want to embolden folks, we want folks to feel, you know, we want people to feel like they can contribute ultimately, no matter what and where they're at in life. And that's what I just hope to be able to do. So I gave a TED talk that's out now. Like I hope it's able to provide that same sort of space for folks to heal.
Well, I believe in your work, and I am a huge supporter. I apologize for the coughing that's out, you guys. But as I was saying, I'm a huge supporter of your work because I'm not the straightest cookie in the whole wide world. I don't know if you know my story, Marlon, but I have hemiplegia cerebral palsy, so I am not the straightest cookie in the whole wide world. And we all have past the lead, but we can all be great leaders because of our background stories.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we can. We definitely can. No, go ahead. Sorry.
Yes, we definitely can. And so, Dawn, what is your favorite podcast that you listen to?
Can I choose two? I'm sorry. I'm sorry to be difficult.
Can you choose two? Yes.
Okay,
go ahead.
Okay. One, you had a guest. I saw you had as a guest. I didn't know that. Looked at it recently. So Support is Sexy, Elaine Fluker, and two, Politically Reactive with W. Kamau Bell. Those are like two that are like on repeat. I mean, I subscribe to several, but like those are the two that I think I like the most.
And Elaine interviewed me on her podcast, so there's a plug for my interview, and there's a plug for Support is Sexy in general. And Yvonne is laughing at me because he didn't know that either. But Elaine does a wonderful job with her podcast in general, and she does a wonderful job with her interviews. And I knew you were going to say the political ones because the political system needs to change. the political system needs to support the not so straight cookies in the world who are becoming great leaders like you and I, and like the people with criminal backgrounds. I'm sorry, but it's like we get to the end of the lollipop once we get put in the diverse system.
Absolutely, no question about it. So I mean, yeah, I am a fan of those two shows. I think we're politically reactive really quick. I like the style. I mean, not only content, but I appreciate the style, and it's very just humans having a conversation and voicing opinions. So, and that's why I try to try my show off of is having a really human element to it.
Yes, having a really human element to it. And my favorite episode of yours, that I'm going to ask you, the favorite child question, was when you interviewed a young man who started drinking hard alcohol at age 16, believe it or not. And he
age 8.
got out of 8.
He was 8 years old.
Oh my
8
God,
years old.
8. I got 16 when we can correct. Thank you for the correction. 8 years old. My God. And so, he of course did some criminal offenses, and he of course went to jail, but he of course was lucky enough to get, I believe, a GED. Correct me if I'm wrong, or maybe it was an associate's degree. I can't.
Well, he's got another PhD he's working on, but he has a bachelor's degree from John Jay College of Criminal Justice. So yeah, I mean,
that's right. He did say that in the interview. And so, what has been your favorite interview that you have done on your podcast?
It has to be an interview. His name is Corey Green, and so I've known Corey for some years now. But sitting down with him, it's funny, you know somebody for years, and we've done work with each other at the program Howler that I spoke about. We helped started that with each other. But when I got to sit down with him for the interview, which is about a little bit over an hour, I learned so much more about him that I just took for granted as a friend. I thought I really knew so much. And then just through that conversation, I learned so much more about him, but more so like what it was like before he was a teenager. And how that affected his decisions, his bad decisions going forward, and also how it still affects his work now. So he did 8 years, 6.5 years in prison. Now he's in a PhD program. But it's for violent crime as well, but now he's in a PhD program. So, I mean, the one with Corey Green, to me, stands out. Because a friend of mine, I learned so much. And I don't know if it's you, but I learned so much more about myself when I listen to other people. And I learned so much more about myself by listening to him.
Yeah. And as you know, you learn so much more about yourself when you interview people.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. So what has been your favorite book and audio book that you have listened to? Because I know in the prison system, you're not allowed the necessary luxury that we have outside to all of us. So you may, I know this for a fact, you may have to share a TV with about 10 other people. And so what did you do in your downtime, and then what's your favorite audio book and book that you have listened to and read?
So, my favorite, downtime while I was in prison or now?
Downtime when you were in prison.
Okay. So my favorite thing to do in my downtime was write. So I kept the 10 years. I have a journal that I kept for the entire 10 years. So for me, writing was my favorite thing. Like, I look forward to that. It was my place of refuge. I looked forward to when I could sit down and write in my journal. The books, Malcolm X's autobiography, and it's really because his evolution. Like, I knew about him. We all hear about him. But I think reading his book really showed me the evolution of a person. And I feel like he would have continued evolving if he didn't, die when he did at such a young age. And audiobooks, so I didn't have access to audiobooks when I was inside. So I just didn't have that. We didn't have access to that in the New York State prisons. I didn't. But there's an audiobook that I would recommend. Maybe it's biased because I know the author too, so sorry. Is a book called How to.
That's okay. Be biased.
Oh, okay. So the book is called. The author's name is Kiese Lanin, and the book is called How to Slowly Kill Yourself and Others in America. And the title is definitely leading and has nothing to really do with killing, but it just really speaks to the levels of vulnerability and that men can show, but also the institutional harms that affect how men act. And I just the book is, to me, is amazing. It's like a lot of series of anthologies and personal experience. It's an amazing book, How to Slowly Kill Yourself and Others in America. And one last one before I get is Frankenstein, Mary Shelley. People might be surprised by that, but it is amazing. Like the undergird of that story to me and the humanity that sort of that's at the undercurrent that underscores that book to me is amazing.
So you said, let me repeat this. You said How to Kill Yourself and Other People in America.
No, How to Slowly Kill Yourself and Others in America.
How to Slowly Kill Yourself. I forgot the word, slowly. And you also said Frankenstein, which surprised me, but Frankenstein wasn't the straightest cookie in the box either. So that, Diamond Robin Envy, because Frankenstein wasn't the straightest cookie in the box either. So, okay. Now, how can people get a hold of you, and how can people potentially come on your podcast to talk about their prison experience? Because I'm sure there's going to be families listening to this podcast who are now fascinated by the prison system, and I'm sure they're going to pass it on to the loved ones if they can. And so are you just looking for people that have been in prison, or are you looking for the correctional officers too, or are you looking for the teachers that are trying to save the kids from going to prison, or what are you looking for?
So first, the folks can contact me, if they want to be a part of it, is at decarcerated@depresidential.com, and depresidential is DEPRECEDENTIAL, and I guess, you can reach out to me that way, or to the website, marlonpeterson.com, and you can find out all that stuff there. But we're looking so this is our first season, and we had amazing feedback thus far. So we're still in the place wanting to get those narratives from people who have been in prison, their narratives. And we're looking at ways to weave in, sort of like if you're reading a book and it has references in the book. So in terms of podcasts, we're looking to ways to engage people who are family members, or the different demographics you explain, teachers, etc. To be reference points for these interviews that we had. To try to get a much more of a panoramic story. So you can reach me that way, marlonpeterson.com, etc.
Or you could reach Marlon on Twitter too. You can reach Marlon on Twitter too, because he's very responsive. That's how I found his podcast. And before
Underscore Marlon Peterson. That's my Twitter name.
Underscore Marlon Peterson. And I kept calling you Vaughn for some weird reason. I noticed that. Sorry about that. I am so sorry about it. I thought Vaughn stuck in my head. For some weird reason. Marlon, I'm so sorry. You should have corrected me at the beginning. Oopsies. I am so sorry. I'm fascinated by what we were talking about. I didn't correct myself. I am so sorry. I am so sorry. But before I let you go, I want you to ask me questions that you've been dying to ask me.
Any question in the whole wide world?
Any question in the whole wide world.
This is simple. I do this for a lot of folks. What is your favorite movie and why?
Now, this is a tough one. I guess I would, movie. I guess I would have to say the latest movie I watched, which I think you should all watch, is The Intern, because The Intern talks about diversity, and it's about a startup company, and these young kids actually hire a older guy who's widowed, and I forget the actor's name right now, who's the older guy. But it talks about diversity in a way that I have never seen. So I would recommend The Intern, and you guys can find that on DirecTV Cinema and all the satellite channels. So that would be my favorite movie.
Okay. I love The Intern too. I watched it twice.
Yeah, that would be my favorite movie. Talk about diversity. Yeah, because you should really, really think about, and even though I have a question for you, Marlon, before I completely let you go. Is there any way that jobs could hire, let's say, someone from the prison system, or would that be hard because they have to do a background check?
Well, hire them for what position, you mean?
Hire them for, let's say, let's give a hypothetical, accounting.
Yes. So, I mean, yes, you can. So the term is like formerly incarcerated people. So you can definitely hire formerly incarcerated folks. As long as, like, whatever they were incarcerated for is not specific to where you're working. So if you rob a bank, you will not probably be hired by a bank.
Yeah.
But I mean,
obviously
so folks can work for the government. Folks can work for the government. Folks can, there's really nothing that folks cannot elevate to the most part, outside of maybe a law enforcement position. But besides that, folks can be in any space. And one of the things that, like, this podcast does, and I hope, is for those places where there are barriers to employment, that these sort of, like, folks get to sort of become a little more empathetic to these stories and see that some of these barriers to employment only help to perpetuate folks doing things. So, I mean, but generally, folks can definitely pretty much get employed anyway.
So even when the background check goes through and the red flags go up, people can still get employed. They just have to be brutally honest with it.
Yeah. The process is that, you can't lie on a job application. If you lie about it, you'll be working there for 15 years, and they can fire you just because you lied on an application. So folks should be honest about it. But it's also about on the place of employers to not just indiscriminately turn people down because they see that, the criminal justice experience. So the background check will show that stuff. And that's the barrier. It's really not there are barriers in policy, but it's just barriers in people, like, making these decisions indiscriminately, and they can gloss over it and say, well, we're not hiring for that reason, when it really is because they have some sort of criminal justice experience. So, I mean, we're just hoping people become much more empathetic to these experiences.
Well, I was just curious, can you still get hired with the criminal record, because I know it will show up as a red flag on background checks. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I was just curious whether it's the employer or the background check, but I guess it's the employer. And so, Marlon, I would love to get your name out there, and I'm sure my team would love to listen to your podcast, my fan base. And I know your podcast could be found in Apple iTunes. Could it be found on the Android side or no?
Apple, iTunes, iHeartRadio, SoundCloud, Stitcher, it's all over the place. On my website, marlonpeterson.com, so you can find it.
Yes. And again, I apologize because some weird reason I got your name stuck in my head. But Marlon, I apologize, and we had a wonderful conversation. Go check out the podcast Marlon and I mentioned, Supported Sexy. Go check out Marlon's podcast, of course, it's phenomenal. But you can't multitask while you're doing this. You will be so engrossed in the story that you may just have to stop and listen to the podcast. So no worky for you. No listening to this podcast and trying to do work. No. No. It's a good go for a run podcast. That's how I put it. A go for a walk podcast. Or just listen to it while you're relaxing, and don't try and clean the dishes because you'll end up breaking the dishes. You'll be so enthralled by Marlon's podcast, and Marlon is laughing at me because that's the honest truth. So if you don't want broken dishes, don't listen to Marlon's podcast as you're cleaning. I know you guys listen to mine as you're cleaning, but you'll be so enthralled by these stories that Marlon is trying to break the barriers of the prison system, and I'm a huge supporter of his work, and I'm sure you guys will be too. And I thank Marlon for coming on. And this podcast is sponsored by Kitter, Kitter. Kitter is a desktop app for Twitter. They compose the tweets, or you can compose the tweets. But what's really cool about Kitter is they put a trending hashtag with it, so you guys don't get lost in the heap. And I appreciate all you guys support. And let's keep this party rolling. Let's keep this diversity party rolling. And thanks to you guys.
Thank you so much for having me here. I appreciate the time.